The pink brain versus blue brain myth. Hi, I'm Nena. I'm a radical feminist, lesbian living in Japan, and I like to talk about these topics, so if you're interested, please join up. Let's get right into it. If you listen to trans activists, you'll often hear that trans people are born in the wrong body. If they're forced to explain this without resorting to sexist stereotypes, they'll give you the neurosexist response that trans-identified males have feminine brains, or female brains, and trans-identified females have masculine brains, etc. Although there's no good science to back this up, they might cite one or two terrible studies where the researchers started with a conclusion and p-hacked the data to find a hypothesis. For an explanation of what I mean with good or bad science, let me explain what these junk studies have done. They start with the conclusion they want to reach, that trans-identified males have female or feminine brains in some way. Next, they gather a small amount of data of trans-identified males, and they do not control in any way for exogenous hormone use or sexuality or anything else. Next, they use a pool of female data. Again, with very little controls. They compare these two pools, one much larger than the other, usually the female data, and they try to find any similarity that they can point to and say, aha, there it is, the similarity. Once they can find anything that they can say is similar, no matter how much of a stretch it is or how statistically unreliable that information is, they'll claim that this is due to magic trans opposite sex brains. This is junk science for many reasons. If there were any proof of reliable brain differences between normal males and trans-identified males, trans people would be diagnosed by brain scans. If this was the case, two pretty amazing things would be true. First, of course, doctors would be able to accurately predict mistaken cases of trans identification. For example, people currently identifying as trans who will later detransition. That should also be on their brain scan, if these pink and blue brains, indeed exist. Secondly, of course, they would be able to scan the general public and identify people who have trans brains and do not know it yet. People who come from cultures where trans identification is not even a thing yet, who immigrate to the States, get a brain scan, and bam, they discover their secret true identity that they didn't even know. Amazing. Anyway, like I said, there's no actual science that supports the pink brain, blue brain theory. On the contrary, neuroscientists have long argued that the brain differences between the sexes are mostly negligible, besides the size of the brain. Males are larger than females on average, and thus have bigger heads and brains. If you adjust for the size differences, it's actually not possible to reliably determine which brain is male or which brain is female from brain scans. Although some areas may lean more male typical or female typical, the average person will have a mosaic of these male and female traits. I'm simplifying this a lot, but I'm not a neuroscientist, and you probably aren't either, so bear with me. To visualize this, let's impose a grid over the brain and color in some pink or blue to mark the traits that are more male or more female typical. Most traits would be somewhere in the middle, so we'll leave them gray. A bunch of individuals may end up looking like this. If you charted the males and females for their similar traits along a distribution, you would probably get two distributions looking like this. Most people are somewhere in the middle with a mix of both male and female traits. There are extremes, but this is a tiny group of people. It's almost comical how simple this whole explanation is, but we're dealing with very kindergarten logic here, so don't blame me. Now, how is it that a trans person could have an opposite sex brain? They might argue that being close to the feminine extreme area makes them female. But does that make any sense? It might be a little hard to see in this diagram because there's so little sexual dimorphism in general. Let's look at an example that is actually quite sexually dimorphic instead. Let's chart male and female heights. You can see two standard distributions. Most men are average, most women are average. The ends taper off because exceptionally short and tall people are less common. If we put both curves on the chart together, you can see some overlap. Now, let's imagine a woman. Jessica is 6 feet and 2 inches tall. That would put her somewhere here on the chart. As you can see, she is much taller than the average American female, and she is still taller than the average American male. you wouldn't be totally shocked to see a 6'2" man walking down the street. However, for a female, her height is on the extreme edge. You've probably only seen a few women this tall in your lifetime, or at least I have. Does this mean that Jessica has a male height? Is she trans height? Of course not, that's ridiculous. A woman having a more male-typical height doesn't have a male height. It is simply the diversity that human females have in height. Of course, there are a few women who are so extremely tall, and there are a few women who are so extremely short. They're both part of the female height range. They're natural variation. Exactly the same thing is true for brains. A man having a more female-typical brain, in whatever function we're measuring here, which, as I've said, barely exists, but whatever. Even so, a man having a more female-typical brain does not have a female brain. He is simply showing the diversity of male brains. Just as there will be a small number of male brains that are astonishingly male pattern, there will be a small number that are on the opposite end of the spectrum. If you're interested in neurosexism, I highly recommend Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine. This book was really interesting. It's basically a book that explains how society shapes people according to gender norms. Definitely give it a read if you're interested in this topic. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'll try to post more frequently. Until then, keep it sloppy. I don't really know. I don't have like an outro yet. Bye.